Hi and welcome to the Demalic Cookery channel. I'm preparing some food today for a family buffet tomorrow. Tomorrow is New Year's Day. One of the things that I'm making today from scratch is a pork pie, and I thought I'd show you guys how I go about doing it. As usual, a full list of ingredients will be given at the end of the video, so let's have a look at those ingredients now and anything else we're going to need for today. So for our pork pie, we'll take the ingredients in two stages. So this is the ingredients that we're going to need for the hot water pastry. 600 grams of plain flour, half a teaspoon of salt, one medium free range egg which has been beaten. So the egg is to seal the pie and also to glaze the top of the pie as well. I've got 200 grams of lard and 190 millilitres of water. So for our pork pie filling, I've got 700 grams of pork shoulder which I'm going to chop quite finely. I've got 500 grams of belly pork which I've asked the butcher to mince, and the contrast between the chopped pork and the minced pork gives a really decent texture. I've got a 500 gram pack of what's called cooking bacon. So this is just the bacon ends, and it's normally a combination of smoked bacon and unsmoked bacon. It's just a really cheap way of buying in bacon that we're just going to put into a pie. So 500 grams of bacon, 50 grams of shop bought white breadcrumbs. I found that the shop bought breadcrumbs are better for this recipe than making your own. And then we've got a seasoning mix, and in the seasoning mix I've got a teaspoon of dried sage, a teaspoon of dried rosemary which has been ground. It's important that we grind the rosemary. Rosemary is quite a hard herb, and when we grind it we start to release the oils. It'll give a much more intense flavour. And I've also got a teaspoon of coarse ground black pepper and a teaspoon of salt. So for our jelly, I've got 200 millilitres of pork stock and one sachet of gelatin. If you're using the leaves, then you need about 3 gelatin leaves for this recipe. So the first job we can do is to prepare the filling, because then we can cover the bowl with food wrap or cling film, place it into the fridge, and the flavours from the seasoning mix can start to infuse through the meat itself. So just for convenience, chopping the meat, I'm just using one of these mini electric choppers, but of course you can chop the meat by hand using a sharp knife. So that's our pork shoulder and bacon finely chopped. Now I'm going to add our pork belly mince, the breadcrumbs, and also obviously our seasoning mix. And then the next thing to do is just to dig in with your hands and make sure that everything is thoroughly mixed in. Okay, so that's everything mixed in thoroughly. I'm just going to wash my hands, then I'm going to cover this bowl with food wrap, place it into the fridge while we get on to the next step. So the first job we want to do is to melt the lard in the 190 millilitres of water. Once the lard is melted, I'm going to bring it just to a gentle simmer, turn the heat off straight away, and then we'll add that then to our plain flour. So while the lard is melting in the water, just going to add our flour into a large bowl, add the salt in, and just mix that through. So once the lard is melted, just going to pour that into the flour. Okay, and just going to mix that through until we get a firm dough. Okay, so that's what we end up with. So we need to work quite quickly here because we don't want the dough to cool down too much, because it'll just go crumbly. So the next thing to do is take off about a quarter, place that into some food wrap, and reserve that to one side, and that will be our lid. So we just flatten out this base, and then we just use a rolling pin, and we want to get this to about 3 or 4 millimeters thick. Okay, so I'm using a 20 centimeter cake tin with a removable bottom, so just make sure that it is a decent size. So we fold that over and then place that onto the cake tin, and then working quite quickly, we just want to make sure that not only do we get all of the air out of the bottom, but we make sure that this sticks up to the sides. It's very important that you don't get any holes at all in the pastry, because once we put in the stock with the gelatin in, any holes in the pastry and that will just leak out. Okay, so once we're happy with the pastry, the next thing to do is to fill the pastry with our pork filling. And it's quite important with this that we don't press down too much, because otherwise this pork filling will just go into an absolute solid block. So we're actually looking to just overfill the pork pie a little bit, create a dome, because once that meat starts cooking in the oven, it will start to shrink. The next thing we want to do is to roll out the pastry top. So now we need to roll out the top. So if you've been handling the pork, wash your hands first, but it's the same technique as before. So I'm just pressing down to flatten it out slightly. And then we're going to use the rolling pin, and the pastry top is going to be about 2 to 3 millimeters thick. Okay, so once we've got the size that we want for the top, the next thing to do is to take our beaten egg and just go around the top, the outside of the pastry on the pork pie, because this will help to seal in the lid. And then fold the pastry over the top of the rolling pin, roll that out, and then the technique that we're going to use is we're just going to pinch this in place all the way around. Okay, so once we're happy that we've sealed all around the edge, the next thing to do is to make a hole in the centre, and I found the easiest thing to use is an apple corer. Final thing for our pork pie is the glaze over the top. So this is where we use the rest of the egg. So this will give a nice shiny finish to the pork pie. So the oven is on, preheated to 170 degrees centigrade, and a pie of this size will take around 90 minutes. What we're looking for is the pastry to be just coming away from the sides of the tin, and obviously be lovely golden brown on the golden colour on the top. Okay, so this is where we're up to. The pie actually took 1 hour and 45 minutes to cook, not 1 hour and 30 that I thought it would, probably because we opened the oven door a couple of times to put other things in the oven. As I said before, a good indication of when it's cooked is when the pastry starts to shrink away from the edge of the tin. So the next thing to do now, I've let it rest for about 15 minutes, is to add the stock with the gelatine in. And in order to make that, if we just move that to one side. So our stock is hot but not boiling. We need to get our sachet. If you're using the granulated gelatin, and just whisk that in. Okay, so once the gelatin is fully dissolved in the stock, the next thing to do is to use a funnel, and just take your time doing this. And we want to put as much stock into the pie as possible. Okay, so the pie has taken all of that stock. This is the bit I hate, which is we now have to leave this to cool further so we can place it into the fridge. Remember, don't put anything warm or hot in the fridge. So wait for this to cool even further. When it's cooled down, I'm going to place it in the fridge, and you have to leave this overnight. It'd be a shame to spoil the pie now by cutting into it too early. So leave it overnight. I'll come back in the morning and I'll show you what it looks like inside. So that's how I make a pork pie, and as long as you follow the basic principles in this video, it'll turn out absolutely delicious. Please subscribe to the channel, and as usual, if you enjoyed this particular video, hit the like button, and a very happy new year to everybody. Thanks for watching.